Let's go over to. I have a topic. We're going to discuss a topic, and I put this on the thumbnail actually. Why are movies today different? And this sounds like an easy question, but we're going to explore it a little bit. Why are movies today different than movies that came out, say, in the 70s and 80s? Okay, I have 5 answers that I could go into with you guys, and please play along. And if I'm missing something, let me know. Okay, so let me go down to my topical slides. Yeah, already got it up. See, what's the difference? Horror generations. Horror generations. All right. This is when I went for a walk today. I literally just came up with this. I went for a walk because sometimes you guys ever do this when you go for a walk? All of a sudden, all these ideas just start flowing in your head, you know, and that's what happened. I started thinking about movies today and why are movies so different than movies back, in earlier times. And you start having a conversation with yourself, and all these answers. So these 5 things just popped in my head as I was talking about this. Okay. So first thing, and this is just my observations. I could be wrong. I could be right. Let me know. But here, first thing, social media drives stories these days. Keep in mind, back in the 80s, even 90s, there were hell, even part of the 2000s, we didn't have social media, and I think there was more of a think tank going on back then. I think there were meetings and studios. Hell, the first Predator was a script by this guy who wasn't really in the business too much. At least I don't think so. And he slid a script under a producer's door. And just by chance, that producer picked up that script and they made Predator, So I think because there was no social media back then, and social media influences everything these days, there was more creativity, and there was kind of nothing was off limits, and hell, just to kind of drive that point home, I was watching this documentary about Brooke Shields today on Hulu. It's a brand new documentary, really interesting. Check it out if you get a chance. But back when her first couple of movies, she was a child. She was literally I think 10 years old, and she played like a prostitute, and then she did The Blue Lagoon, and she was naked in that movie. I don't think they actually show, it was strategic camera work, even though she was nude. And I was just thinking, there's no way in hell that these movies would be made today because of social media and the outright outrage that we would have today if they even dared try to make movies like that. I'm not saying whether it was wrong or right. Even back then, I probably wouldn't have wanted to watch, especially if I was a grown man. I was a child back then, but if I was a grown man, I'd probably shy away from watching a movie with a child, being naked. I wouldn't like that. I would feel weird and off. But there were some pretty scumbag, asshole, douchebag producers back then, and I think there's pros and cons to the material that they made in movies back then. Sometimes it's nice to be able to push the envelope a little bit and not really care what the zeitgeist is and what's popular and what doesn't ruffle any feathers. They didn't think like that back then. So there was a good thing to it, but then there's also sometimes, are they going too far? And they did go too far, I think, a few times in the 80s. That doesn't mean that, depending on the movie itself, okay? But that doesn't mean that, I want that erased from existence. It was there in that time frame, and it'll be there throughout time. And if anything, it's, hey, wow, they really went for it back then. They touched on really taboo topics. and it existed, but it's a lesson on what was, I guess, considered appropriate back then. So, but then there's the bad side of it with social media, where when writers use social media to govern the direction that their stories should go, we want to make sure that we satisfy these three audiences, or four, just an example. That gets in the way of creativity. And then you get lukewarm movies, to me. When it feels like there's something of an agenda pushed in there, then I don't know. So that's why, and there's other things I want to mention, but I think they're going to be down the list here. Matter of fact, let me take a quick look at my list to make sure, because I don't want to mention the same thing twice. So one thing I'm thinking of right now that's not on that list actually is everything is sequels and remakes these days. And, that's John Carpenter talked about this at a con that he was at. Like, it's a built-in brand. That's why studios, it's a risk factor. What's more risky? An already established property, or, this brand new original idea over here? I'm going to go with this already established property that's already made us money. Let's keep making that. And the other day I was at the movie theater, and I was looking at the movie posters, and I want to say out of the, let's say there were 5 movie posters that I was looking at, 4 of them were either a sequel or a remake. I think only one of them was an original property. And that's just the way things are these days, So, yeah, I guess I can add that to topic number 1. Okay, so number 2, digital filmmaking. I think there's pros and cons to digital filmmaking. I love that grainy look that you get with film and 35 millimeter and everything. But with digital filmmaking, I think that's one reason why we're seeing so much more coming out these days. Whereas if you remember back in like the 80s, when you would go to the theater, there'd be a couple movies playing, but not like today, where you'll see like freaking a dozen movies playing, 16 movies playing. And I think one reason for that is digital filmmaking. And it cuts costs and time. You don't have to buy, film reel. You could do multiple takes, whereas each take counted when you were shooting on film, So, and that's just kind of a fact of the matter for today. And I think maybe that's why we do see a lot more independent films these days, is because, hell, anybody. I mean, maybe that's why we see so many fan films these days, is because we all have a camera now. Hell, there's movies that freaking Steven Soderbergh shot a film on a freaking iPhone. There's been a couple of directors that have done this. So it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just an observation. That's one of the differences we see today. Digital filmmaking. All right. We didn't have digital filmmaking back then. We do now. And I'd say, just a wild guess, maybe like 75% of movies are filmed digitally now. And that, I don't know. I didn't do my homework and pull up my figures, but yeah. And Rosalia brings up a good point about practical effects. Maybe that's why we don't see as many practical effects these days, is because of digital filmmaking and being able to create visual effects right there on a computer. Sometimes it's easier to do that, especially with templates. I've already built a base template. Hell, I do that with my YouTube reviews. I have a base template for my top 10s. I have a base template for my reviews. So I have that intro that you see, my little patron cards, anything that you see in every single video, I already have a template for it. So that way it just saves me time, Can you imagine if I had to shoot my reviews on film? What a freaking nightmare. So, like I said, it's just an observation. It's kind of a good thing sometimes, So, next item is boomers to Z. All right, boomers to Z. Would you say the baby boomers, they were kind of the primary audience in like the 80s? Yeah. So that generation is it's just a different mindset than, you know, Generation Z. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying they're different. They're just different. I'm Generation X. And I would even say Generation X is a little bit different than Generation Z. You know, some people might call Generation Z the TikTok type generation. That's not a jab. That's just, we have TikTok these days, and Generation Z loves TikTok, you know? And TikTok has its benefits. It's awesome. Some people make a freaking living off of TikTok now. It's cool. And there's some factors that go into there, like the freaking the attention span. Some people have a shorter attention span these days. You know, there's been this debate. If Halloween came out today, would it be a big hit? And I think maybe not. Maybe not, because films, I think, horror, like slasher movies that come out today, they have a different rhythm than they did back then. They're a little bit more fast-paced, you know? And I think filmmakers do that because certain audiences, most audiences these days, most younger audiences like a nice fast pace, you know? Not all, but some of them do. And again, don't look at this as me jabbing at any particular generation or technology or anything. This is just me observing things. That's all it is, okay? I would even say horror has been in a phenomenal rhythm these last few years. It's been pretty awesome, actually. I've really dug a lot of the stuff that's come out these days. I'm not one of these stuck in my ways, you know, old fogey type guys that only watches 80s horror movies. Some people do that, and that's fine. I don't do that. I am always looking for something new. So, yeah, again, like I said, I'm not trying to be that guy. Some horror fans are like that. They don't like the newer stuff, and that's fine. I do. I like a lot of the newer stuff, you know? And plus, doing what I do with YouTube, it kind of helps to like some of the newer stuff, and I like to be surprised. I think horror movies, they still surprise us, which is really cool. I think Halloween surprised us back in 1978, you know? Most of the time when you have a cultural phenomenon, there's usually something there that shakes things up a little bit, you know? Could like Avatar. People say that story has been told a million times, but it wasn't the story as much as it was the technology. We'd never seen CGI that crystal clear and this world building, this, you know, expansive and imaginative. So yeah, anytime Blair Witch Project, you know, that's almost the opposite end of the spectrums as far as like budgets go, but it shook things up, right? You have to have new movies, new horror to shake things up every now and then. Otherwise, it starts getting stale. So, boomers to Z, it's fine. You know, I love looking back at a lot of those 70s and 80s movies, even 60s. I've kind of been in a love fest lately with that generation. You know, Italian horror. Most Italian horror movies that I love are from like the 70s. So I like it all. I like it all. You know, I think it's fine. Okay. Next one. Is horror the least tainted genre? And I want an answer from you guys on this one, okay? Because I was thinking about this. And this kind of applies to that sequels and remakes thing that I was talking about earlier. Everything is a freaking sequel, you know? Especially with superhero movies, with action movies. Comedies, not so much. I mean, comedies don't really do anything these days. But horror is the one genre that you can still put out a lot of original content. You know, I can look at my Letterboxd list from the last 5 years, and I would wager that at least maybe 60 to 75% of the horror movies that I've watched have been original content, you know? You can't really say that for like other genres, especially action, especially superhero. They keep making the same things over and over. And to make things worse with superhero movies, if they do make an original one, it's pretty much a template of every superhero origin story. I just saw this like for The Beetle, Was it the Blue Beetle? I saw the trailer for that. It looked fun. You know, it's got the Cobra Kai kid in there. But I was just thinking, that looks like just your average superhero origin story. You know, you can pretty much predict what Act 1 is going to be. You know, him finding, there's going to be an accident that happens, or he's going to find his power in some weird way. The Act 2 is going to be him dealing with his newfound power, and he's going to make mistakes, and he's going to fail. And then Act 3 is going to be the big villain that he's going to have to fight, and there's going to be this big happy ending. I just gave you the whole story. That's what the Blue Beetle's going to be, okay? Whereas horror, man, they shake things up. There's this new horror movie coming out. Did you see what they're doing? They're freaking taking like this quicksand. They're taking this whole idea of people in quicksand. The whole movie's that, and they got to figure out a way to get out of the quicksand. You know, you can build a whole horror movie out of that. You can't really build a superhero movie out of just a superhero in one location doing nothing. You know, so yeah. That's one thing I love about this genre. Horror it's the one pure genre that still is able to flesh out great original content. You know, it's awesome. It's awesome. He gets the girl in Act 2, but then they break up. Yeah, they mix a little bit of the love story in there. Yeah. Juan says horror movies of today suck. They can't hold a candle to the 80s films. Would you guys agree with that? Horror movies of today suck. They can't hold a candle to 80s. I need to know. I'm not even going to answer them. I'm going to let you guys answer them. Do you guys agree with that? Do you think horror movies today suck? Jason brings up a good point. Horror has no sex or nudity anymore. An interesting shift. I would say for the most part. But there's still movies with nudity, like X. X has a lot of nudity, actually. I'm finding with horror, I don't really need nudity. You know, I'm not against it, but it's not like in my top 3 things that I gotta have. You know, my answer to that for the Juan's statement earlier is I think there's a lot of great horror coming out today. You know. I mean, there's a reason why studios constantly put out horror, because it's cheap, and there's some really good movies, you know? The fans will speak. If they don't like the movie, it's not going to do that good. If horror is really sucking, then word of mouth is going to get out that, no, you don't want to go see a horror movie, because have you seen the last 3 horror movies that came out? They all just really sucked eggs, like really bad. So I'm not going to waste my time with that. But no, it's kind of the opposite. It's been like, damn, they've just been freaking knocking out good movie after good movie after good movie, you know? So I'm gonna go see this horror movie, you know? So I think horror's doing really good. I actually enjoy a lot of the stuff that's coming out today. To my surprise, actually, okay? Yeah, Pearl, Terrifier 2, Richard Strange, definitely loved both of those. I loved all 3 Halloween movies. And they had kind of a newer edge to them, you know. They didn't feel like something out of the 80s. But I enjoyed all 3 of them. I really did. I've enjoyed the Scream movies. They've been fun, but also the original stuff, you know. Dave says he really likes Skinamarink. I will say Skinamarink, it was different. I'll give it that. I didn't really care for it, but it was different, you know. So, last one, Icons in the New Age. Icons in the New Age. And it's just kind of talking about the differences, you know. There was like a shift with the horror icons, because in the 80s, I think the icons, their feet were more firmly planted in the era. And that's why you had so many freaking Friday movies and Nightmare movies and Halloween and even Chucky, Leatherface, and you could go down a freaking long line. Horror icons, they were really having a heyday in the 80s. And the only horror icons we see these days that aren't already established way back then, because most of them today are characters that were around back then, right? I could be wrong on that if I think out loud here, but I mean, Halloween's still around. Scream is still around. Scream was 90s, but you know, a new Friday is imminent. I would think another Nightmare is imminent. But the new ones, we have some new ones today. We have 2 Terrifier movies, and Terrifier is going to keep going. I know that. I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in terms of newer horror icons. And I think Terrifier might be kicking that off. You had Hatchet. Hatchet's got a few movies out. So there's different flavors out there for different people. But I think it's a little bit looser these days than it was back then. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I wrong here? I don't know. But I think there's a little bit of a difference. Because back then, too, like they would crank out those movies like every year. Except for Halloween. Because Halloween, you did have a good gap there from like 81 to 88. So, but really like Jason and Freddy were pumping out movies. Whereas those guys, especially Jason and Freddy, I mean, you might get a movie every 4 years, 5 years, something like that. So who knows? That one I got to kind of figure out in my head a little bit more. But I do feel like there's a little bit of a difference with the horror icons now compared to back then in the 80s. Okay. So I don't know. So that's that discussion for horror generations. I don't know what my point was. I just wanted to kind of compare the two, you know, not saying one's better than the other, but they're just different. All right. That's what I wanted to kind of drive home a little bit. Just kind of observe, you know. What's up, guys? You are at the end of the DD Live clip. What I do is I like to clip these out if I think the topic is important or something that's newsworthy. So thank you for watching. And if you want to watch more, you can go over here. You can go over here, click on one of those. And yeah, hopefully I can do this for 20 seconds, which I think I did. Okay, so yeah, thanks for watching, guys.